fucking beamer all clean, fit too mean, finger all shiny on my baby's diamond ring. I was on a high till I caught onto the scene. Swear I lost my heart when I fell in love with things. Rookie year went broke like Jalen Rose. Got the price, sold my soul to the things I own. Switched up, locked in and got my mind right. Prioritizing, got my business and my time right.
So my name is Hai Mohamath. Here, everybody calls me Hai. My Cham name is Abdurrahman Muhammad. Abdurrahman is kind of like the Cham twang onto the pronunciation of how do you say that, like what my mom calls me, what people in the community and stuff usually say. So, and then a little bit of my origin story. I guess my origin story would be my mom's Vietnamese, my dad's Cambodian, but he's Khmer Cham. So he's Cham ethnically from Cambodia. They met in the Philippines while there were refugees there in Bataan before they came to the States. Had me, our pops came here in '89 and I was born, and then my mom and I came over here, and then 4 kids later, our whole family's out here in the Bay Area. Back home, like in Cambodia, my Cambodian side lives in Phnom Penh. They live on the outskirts of it by the river, where the Dragon Boat Festival is held every year, I think. I want to say it's every year. I'm not sure about that. And my mom's side, or my Cham side, on my mom's end, because my mom was Vietnamese, just Yuan. She's married in. So the Vietnamese side that we have there is my dad's brother that lived there. They're in Châu Đốc. On the Cham side, in Cambodia, my family's in Phnom Penh. Lives on the outskirts of the rivers in the Cham villages along the province. And then my mom is Yuan. My uncle's family over there that she goes back to visit. My dad's brother is in An Phu in South Vietnam, close to the Vietnam-Cambodia border in the provinces out there. So a small little village out there. I personally speak Vietnamese and Cham, Cantonese and English, because I picked up Cantonese from my friends. Spoke Vietnamese with my mom and Cham with my dad.
You know that Cantonese is from that hood side.
Yeah, for sure. Growing up, you got to immerse yourself in the culture. I feel like people who speak different languages, it's kind of easier for them to pick up the phonetics of different languages. It's mixed in. Like when we Pyo Slam, that's how you say it in Cham. So that's Assalamu alaikum and Walaikum Salam. That's the Arabic greeting. May peace be upon you. That might not be the literal correct translation, but this is the chopped and screwed, the modern way of translating that. But like if I walk in and I see elders, it's like Chapgo Semen, Mai, Mute Va. At one point the Cham Empire was half of Vietnam, half of Cambodia. We lost it through war, political, geo-economical situations or whatever. We lost it down the route. But when you talk to Cham people, you can tell if they're Cham Yuan or Cham Khmer. Cham Khmer right there has the title in its name that we identify ethnically as Cham, but like natively in Cambodia, you know what I mean? Even our language has adopted verbiage from each sides of the realm. I don't think it's necessarily wrong, because if my dad is Khmer Cham, we're Cambodian, but we're Cham ethnically, you know what I mean? Just like I'm Cham American, I'm Vietnamese, Cambodian American. I'm American, but my ethnicity, my history is Cham Vietnamese Cambodian. So I think it's important to know that. I don't find that there's a difference. I think that you're Cham, you're Khmer, like you're Cambodian. You know what I mean? And I guess it just depends on the history and the depth of if your family was really from there or not. Like because it could be ambiguous. Like some people identify as, you don't speak your language, are you even that? You know what I mean? Like you're Yuan and you don't speak Vietnamese. That could be kind of subjective, but it's like he's clearly Vietnamese, right? You know what I mean? But another part of the way language develops and geographical isolation and how all that develops, could be, correct me if I'm wrong, I could be using the wrong verbiage here, but you lose some, you win some, right? You adapt, it kind of adapts into this more modern way of communicating, and the language kind of continuously adapts, but you lose some of the history, you kind of modernize some of it. My thing is, I think it's just important to understand that like Cham itself was an empire historically, and then now demographically we're separated, and that's all it is. You know what I mean? So I think Cham is Cambodian in a sense, if your family's from that, and you know what I mean. And Cham Yuan is also Yuan, you know, they're Vietnamese. You know what I mean? They're just Vietnamese Cham. So like the difference in the language adaptation and how it adopts kind of, you know, where we're from demographically, Vietnam or Cambodia. In Cham, like my dad would say, we would go to the market, Nap Sa, right? Nap Sa, Sa is a Cambodian word though. So Sa means market in Cambodia, but a lot of Cham Vietnamese people say đi chợ, now chợ. You know what I mean? Chợ is a Vietnamese way of saying it. So it's very interesting to hear that. And if you understand kind of like the accents in Cham, because technically that's two different accents, right? If you want to think about it in a modernized way of how language develops, then those are accents. And talking to an elder and how you talk to them, if they say Nap Sao or Đi Chợ, like you can tell they're Cham Yuan or Cham Khmer. So I think that's very important. That's an interesting way that the language develops. Now, Cham, historically, ambiguously, we can speak that to each other, no problem. It's a very subtle accent, but it's like how Latins, there's different Spanish, right? Puerto Rican Spanish, Dominican Spanish, Spain Spanish, and then Mexican Spanish. So there's differences in that, and they can tell it apart just like how we can with each other. So that me personally, with my siblings, when we go back, we speak it really well, and a lot of the elders in our community have always responded with like, oh, they speak Cham really good. And when I go back to the country, it helps me solidify that even more, because now I'm learning words, I'm getting it corrected, they're correcting my grammar, they're correcting my, you know what I mean, like verbiage and stuff. So I find that very interesting. So I think our Cham is, I want to say it's pretty good. It's definitely higher, like if you had to grade it on like, can you just understand and respond? Can you communicate? And you know what I mean? Can you hold a conversation? Can you understand the news? Is kind of how I layer the levels of understanding a language. With Cham, we communicate very well with the elders, and they're always very shocked. Like I go back to the provinces and the community, and I can communicate outside of my family at the size, at the, you know what I mean, at the markets and stuff. If they're Cham, they're always like, oh, you're not from here. Yeah, you know, I'm an American, but they're like, "Hơi thăm dạy Cham, you know how to speak Cham. Hôm dài nay, you speak it well, you know what I mean? Mạ ya hơi to hơi chặt, you know what I mean? Meaning your mom and dad taught you and you're very intelligent. So it's always a very humbling experience to be able to know that I can communicate with my own culture. Now, the goods and bads of that, right? Like I speak Cham fluent, but Khmer I don't. So when I go back to the country, even though I'm Cambodian, I identify as Cambodian, in Phnom Penh or in the airports, I can't communicate in Khmer. Once I tell them though I'm Khmer Cham, they always let me be. It's like getting a hall pass. They're like, oh, okay, I get it. You know how to speak Cham, Hutam Ya Cham, Hutam Ya Go. You know what I mean? Which is, you know how to speak Cham, you don't know how to speak Cambodian. So I guess like there's always the gives and takes, right? You know what I mean? My dad makes sure to teach us the dying language of Cham versus Cambodia, who, you know, and he says it too, you can, as an adult, you can go pick it up. You can go learn. Your cousins will teach you. You know what I mean? When I go back to Cambodia, I learned how to count. I learned how to ask for a cafe todako. You know what I mean? Like, you know, stuff like that. Sense with like the different references to the roots of Khmer and this exclusion of Cham, I don't think it's necessarily an exclusion. I think when people look at history, they try to label it and objectively view it as negative. But in this case, I'm taking it and hearing this for the first time from you as, I think the exclusion was more so respectful because we did lose our empire and our kingdom to Cambodians. You know what I mean? And by technicality, we're not Cambodian in that historical sense. From the kings, from the Cambodian Khmer kings ruling, I guess, in that sense, is that, like, you know, he's acknowledging the mixture of all these different, like, the Khmer Empire was once as far as the eye can see when you're standing at, like, the peak of Angkor Wat. So then if you think about that, that land can touch a lot of newfound borders now, right? So then it's like, for him to exclude Cham, maybe that's respectfully saying that Cham he recognizes as their own standing. So I take it as that. I try to not be so negative in the views of historical narrative. There you go. Historical narrative. I try to think about the lighter side, you know what I mean? Just like when we were talking earlier, I don't think the differences between Cambodia and Cambodia, you see what I'm saying? Like, it's like Cambodia, if a foreigner come up and they're trying to intertwine and learn about each other. Cambodia, how would you spell that in English when the Khmer language is scripture? Like, it's, right? Technically, scripture. I don't know if it's like Chinese, if it's what is it called?
Characters?
Yeah, characters.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So then it's like Cambodia.
Right.
You know, Cambodia kind of has a phonetic sound to the same, but it's, is it different? Is it not? Is it because over the years, the generation gap, it's fallen into this diversity? You know what I mean? The river flows separate now, or is it like really, like the same thing in the same sense? I'm sure in our light, being that we're Cambodian Americans, have had challenges from both ends, Americans or our own friends that are Cambodian or Cham, that they push us that we're more this or more here versus like what we identify as.
You're never enough. Right?
Yeah, you're never enough, right?
You're too Chen for Chinese people,
Yeah.
or you're too Cham for Khmer people, but you're not completely Chinese, or you're not completely Cham too, because you're mixed with Vietnamese or something else in there. So I could see that.
Yeah, and in this day and age, we have to understand, like, our family history was different. You're Khmer Chan, I'm Khmer Chan, but like we know where the roots are, where we identify as. You know what I mean? Like, you're Khmer Chan, but you don't speak Cantonese, right? But does that make you less Khmer Chan? No, like I don't think so, because like this man here probably knows more about his history than a lot of Cambodian kids here that don't even speak a lick of Cambodian. And I'm not saying that language is the defining factor in your identity. I'm just saying it could be argued either way.
Yeah,
it could be. I wasn't born in Cambodia, and I don't think that makes me less Cambodian. And I don't speak Cambodian, but I don't find myself being less Cambodian than somebody else. I just think that, it's just like us being American, and a lot of people don't identify themselves as American off top. Like when we ask what you are, you say Tahitian, you say Cambodian, I'm Vietnamese and Cambodian. We don't say American first. You know what I mean? So I guess that's interesting. I the way I call it is that, like, if your dad is from Cambodia, your mom is from Cambodia, or where's your family from? I think it's an easy way to say it. I don't think you knowing the history makes you less Cambodian than the next person. I think that everybody should challenge themselves, though, to learn about their own culture. I think that's a big deal. We, in this day and era of internet and technology, it's so easy for history to be lost, because I find that learning about your cultural identity is a combination of research and data that's actually proven, and also like what's passed down from the generations, like what your grandfather has told your dad has told you, what you're going to pass down to your kids. I think that helps identify a lot of people too. Like my kids could, depending on who I get with, could not be full. They're definitely not going to be half Vietnamese, half Cambodian. They'll only be a quarter. What they identify as could be any of the above. But you know what I mean? I think it's important to know all of them and kind of identify all of them. You know what I mean? At some point, the generations become so diluted that it's going to shift to something else. Like my grandkids could identify as completely different than, you know what I mean? Their great-grandfather versus my great-grandparents, who probably could have been Cambodian, to be honest. Being Vietnamese and Cambodian, but I'm Cham, is how I explain it to people who understand what Cham is. But to the modern, the next person I meet socially is just Vietnamese and Cambodian, because they don't know. Then you got to explain more, right?
Yeah.
But I think I would have to say Vietnamese, and that's just off of my personal preference, that I can also identify as Vietnamese Cham, and that I speak Vietnamese more fluently than I do Cham.
Is it because the fact that you're living here and not over there in Cambodia?
Yeah, that has to do with it. But in our traditional households, like your mom raises you, so you adopt a lot of, it's matriarchal, and that makes sense. You see how the history is falling in line with my own personal experience, and it makes sense that, like, I identify more with Vietnamese culture.
Right.
The Vietnamese culture on that end, and the Cham culture that's integrated there, versus the Cambodian side. You know what I mean? Like, if I go back to the country, one or the other, in Vietnam, I could perfectly be fine by myself. Read and write, I can get around, I can work, I can do whatever. In Cambodia, it would take a learning curve. Like, I would have to pick up the language,
Right.
learn it, still can't read it, because scripture is so hard to read,
Right.
and, like, characters are very hard to read. Talk to some older heads, like I find that like there's no difference, because for them it's just kind of one and the same. But I think for us, learning about it, like historical facts and like specifics and history, you know what I mean, that gives us the line of boundaries and the gaps. But sometimes I think talking to them, for them, is no difference. That they're just Cham in Cambodia. There's no real, you know what I mean?
Right, and your pops might have been more integrated than other people, you know? There might be other people that are completely feeling like they're more like, no, this is different, you know?
Yeah.
If they were oppressed or...
Yeah, and again, that's I think that's subjective to your own personal experience in it. Like, my dad speaks fluent Cambodian. He gets along just fine. Yeah, he speaks very fluent. Yeah. He goes back. He's fine. You know, he looks like Cambodians. Yeah. He gets along. Like, it's nice and easy, you know, versus weird mix and we don't look like it.
I don't know how your ass turned out Mexican.
Yeah, I end up Mexican looking, so it's always funny too. So even Cham people were like, what the fuck are you? Like, you know, until I start to speak the language. So it's a weird way to say it. I wasn't out there looking for other Cham kids to kind of relate to. I felt like it was just always like my home life and my identity at home. And then I go to school and it's just kind of normal. Like, you go out, you meet all kinds of people. If anything, I grew up with a lot of Chinese kids. So I'm very Chinese influenced in that sense. I line dance, I did martial arts, I grew up in Chinatown. And my friends were always very engaging. They knew that we're Vietnamese and Cambodian. We weren't really ostracized for that, like the typical high school drama and politics. So we got that. And we were able to build our sense of confidence from our roots of it all were friends like this. By the time I got to college in Rai, it was really like, oh, you know, what's up, man? What are you? Natural conversation. And then you kind of naturally engage and bond and like, oh, this, and that, you know? Like he asked me what nationality I was. I was like, I'm Vietnamese and Cambodian. He goes, but your last name's Muhammad. I'm like, yeah, I'm Muslim. So he goes, oh, you're Khmer Cham. And I'm like, bro, you know what Cham is? You know what that is? I was like, you Cham, bro? I thought we had a moment. This was the first time in my life I thought I was going to have a moment with somebody else that was Cham. Nope, not the case. In this case, he was Khmer Cham, and he just knew historically what it was. He told me about how his grandma, about the villages, about, you know what I mean? About his association, his coming.
How does that feel?
That felt good. That felt good for just somebody to know to be historically sound and to also be curious enough to ask you about your history and your lineage. But that was probably the closest moment I've ever had to like, oh, meeting another Cham dude off the street. We don't do that. You know what I mean? Like, I can go anywhere and bump into another Vietnamese guy or a Cambodian uncle at the casino. Like, it's, you know what I mean? But Cham is very rare. Like, it's just rare. Other than people I grew up seeing and see when I go to these functions, I've never bumped into somebody else who's Cham.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but that's where it's crazy because it also really proves to me, for at least, that like our demographic is so small. I want that to be clear. This is my personal experience, and it's not like I'm the advocate, you know what I mean, by any means for Cham and you know what I mean, Cham history. But like, you know, maybe I'll learn something or be corrected by somebody else, by an elder, by somebody like me who's an immigrant that's historically sound. They're historically sound and they know and they can disprove me or they can correct me and my stuff, and I can learn and just continue to learn. We're here to continuously learn, educate ourselves and be correct. So I think that there's a lot of value in that. And, you know, like I said, and I'll speak this to the viewers, is that, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, you know what I mean? Provide your opinion. Really, you know, this is the platform and it's a good place for people to do this. This is our era and our generation and how we can reach out and connect and share our stories. Back home, I think there are people trying to rally to be able to celebrate Cham and to find their own independence, in a sense, away from Cambodia and Vietnam. But again, you know, in this modern day and age, you're not going to go to war and fight over land anymore. It's just kind of like being recognized by the government, I think. I think in society, when I've gone back and witnessed it in firsthand in my experience, Vietnamese people are very aware of Cham. Cambodians are very aware of Cham people. Like, you know, they live in harmony. Like, there's not really anything. It's more so the newer generation that, like, want to combat it on behalf of our prior generations to bring out some independence. But, you know, I'm always on the realm of, like, from a place of learning, from a place of somebody genuinely being curious and you genuinely giving your best explanation, not necessarily historical facts, but your best experience and explanation, I think that's going to speak more volumes than me going, hey, bro, don't call me Cambodian. You know what I mean? Like, I'm Cham. Like, come on, dude, that just sounds defensive. When really, like me, in my case, I identify with both. So, like, I'm not even going to sit here and argue with that with anybody. You know what I mean? But you can catch some other people doing that. And it's like, cool, you know, like, pick your battles, man. Fight your fight, you know? Like, I'm very easy with that. You asking me is very important. Your wife asking me is very important because it shows like she's willing to educate herself on something that's not even really, like, not to sound offensive. This isn't your history, but to learn it, to be a worldly student, and to be a student of life and learn, it's going to teach people empathy and tolerance. You know what I mean? The difference is, like, there's so many different minorities in one country like Cambodia, just like America. It's a melting pot. And for you to ask is, and you bringing the page out, right? This is important. All Things Cambodian is important because it's bridging the gap of, like, how do I ask this in a respectful manner, and how do I respond in a not defensive tone? Mm-hmm. And that's the biggest thing about people willing to talk about the hard things and to ask the hard questions, and to not, you know, like, he's not being rude, I'm not being defensive. It's learning. We're genuinely sitting here trying to learn about each other. I think that's very important. That's going to bring this page to life. Like, when you get people that reach out that have more questions, I might not know all the answers, but I could tell you my experience. So if they ask me, I'm gonna give them my experience and exchange their story with mine. Like, oh, dude, that you might make me think differently. You know what I mean? So I think that's important.
Vertigo from the nose dive. G6 for no drive, yeah, yeah, yeah. Dark clouds in no clear skies. Got me seeing lo-fi like all the time. Pretty eyes so they don't cry.